Welcome to our Talent Connect breakout session. My name is Scott Parrish. We have been talking about some intense things this morning. Artificial intelligence, the transformation of our industry through talent intelligence, and now you've signed yourself up for neuroscience and biases. It's definitely, we're definitely getting geeky with it. I'm going to introduce you in a minute to Ginny, who is an expert in neuroscience and is doing really interesting things applying this in the recruitment space. But I just want to say, I've been working out of our London office. I don't know, is anybody here from the Europe side? Oh, nice one, hi. I'm working out of our London's office. I love this BBC show called The Secret Life of 4-Year-Olds. I don't know if anybody has seen this. It's a fascinating documentary that follows 4-year-olds around. And one of the things that you observe by watching 4-year-olds on this show is that their biases are apparent at age 4. The way that they are interacting with the world is already starting to get hardwired in. That's pretty powerful stuff. And that follows us through. So what we'll be talking about this morning is how we address those biases. And so without further ado, I would like to introduce Ginny.
Thank you guys for having an interest in getting geeky with me, because I can tell you I probably talk about neuroscience a little too much. My parents are tired of hearing about it. So is my boyfriend. So the fact that all of you showed up is evidence for my parents that other people actually care about it too. So what we're going to do today is we're going to walk through some details about the brain. I'm going to try to keep it light and fun for you guys. Then we're going to go into some evidence that shows where bias shows up and how that kind of correlates back to what happens in your brain. And then we're going to talk about ways to solve it. So to get started, as recruiters, we're obviously in the business of people. But if you knew me in high school, you'd probably be surprised that I landed in this industry. I was a nerd, a huge nerd. As president and only member of the Point Loma High Science Fair Club, my nerd was very serious. So serious, I actually ended up breaking up with my high school boyfriend so I could focus on science fair. Thanks, guys. He was not happy with me. So once I got to college, I still nerded out. I majored in neuroscience. That's how I kind of got a passion for it. But I knew I needed some balance and some social skills. So I joined a sorority. All jokes aside, it was awesome. I ended up joining a house full of really driven women who wanted to redefine what it meant to be a sorority girl. Every year, our 200 or so members would get together and pick 4 qualities that we were targeting in new members. During one of these meetings, one of our African-American members raised her hand. And she said, mind you, these 4 qualities were things that we should be lacking in, that we wanted to improve upon. So she said, I think we should target more minorities, that should be one of the 4 qualities that we agreed to look for this year. Everyone fell silent. This was 2008. Now, I don't know if you guys remember, but if you roll back to them that year, it was kind of this imaginary post-racial America. Everybody's like, we're about to elect a black president. My generation, sorry, the mic's going in and out, I apologize, guys. This was the first wave of Obama-era millennials. We were supposed to be woke before the term woke even existed. Obviously, there's some mistakes in that thought process. This is how I responded. Minority doesn't need to be on the list because we already care deeply about finding great members of all backgrounds, regardless of their race. Obviously, I was a little clueless at the time. I know now, both through some of my studies, but just life in general, that I wasn't thinking about my response when I said that. What was influencing me is something called in-group bias. I was so sure from my perspective that race didn't need to be on the list, I didn't even open the door to dialogue with her. I couldn't even see what she was trying to show me or at least just bring to my attention. As you can see, there's a lot of girls in that sorority that look like me, and not many that don't look like me. So neuroscience to the rescue, right? That's like the common answer to this question. So somehow neuroscience for me was what showed me what I was unable to kind of see that day. Neuroscience was what helped me understand there's ways that the brain acts without our conscious selves realizing it that influences how we respond, and how we respond almost automatically, like in that instance when I responded to my sister. Unconscious bias is the mechanism through which this happens. I know you'll hear probably today, and with all of the amazing speakers that have hinted and touched on diversity and inclusion, you'll hear them reference unconscious bias. But really what I want to kind of define it as for you guys is this is just the mechanism through which your brain responds based on a number of things that we'll go into greater detail in a second. So think when I say unconscious bias, think automatically, think subconscious. So today, I'm gonna get real Bill Nye the Science Guy on you. I'm gonna marry my love of science with my love of people. I'm gonna show you how to make your managers give a crap about their own biases and what you can do to solve some of those problems. So before we get into some of the brain science, I'm gonna do a little video really quickly for you. So focus on the car. So I'll let you all take a little bit of a breath. Okay, I promise there's a purpose to this. I'm not just trying to wake you up after lunch, although it's helpful for that too. So I don't know if you noticed, but a few of you jumped. Some of you, your heart's probably racing. A few of you verbally gasped. Even though you know that guy's not real. That zombie is not in the room. It has no risk to you. It's not coming after you. Our brains cause automatic reactions despite our conscious selves thinking about it first. You didn't have to think when you gasped. You didn't have to think when you got startled. So again, carry through with that thought process. So the area of the brain that's in charge of that automatic response is no bigger than an almond. This area is called the amygdala. Neuroscientists have found it to be responsible for playing a role in all of these different behaviors and interactions, but the major place it plays, probably the biggest role, is memory, recall, and anxiety and fear. This makes sense, right? We typically, as what Scott had mentioned, are taught what to fear in our lives. My boyfriend's terribly afraid of spiders. And he knows exactly when he learned to be afraid of spiders is when his dad made him watch Arachnophobia at probably too young of an age. So we learn those responses, and when we make decisions on a day-to-day basis, especially rapid decisions or unconscious decisions, we rely on our memories to tell us what to do, especially when it's something we're scared of and need to react quickly to. So why can't we override our response to the zombie in the video? The amygdala operates thousands of times faster than our conscious brain. It hijacks decision-making away from your conscious brain. It is the only known brain structure to have driver's seat control over the rest of the brain. Why does this happen? Well, you can go back to evolutionary biology, but I won't take you on that massive tangent. Just think, we inherited this when humans maybe were in a harsher world where there were a lot more threats when we walked around on a day-to-day basis, and being someone who was more anxious and faster to jump and run at the smallest thing in the dark probably lived longer, probably had more kids. So we have them to thank for our most unconscious and automatic brain reactions. But the fast brain, the unconscious brain, the amygdala, isn't always right. The video is a great example of this. Why would you waste energy being scared in response to a zombie that's just not going to come out of the screen and hurt you? Another example of this is when unconscious bias influences us to hire someone for the wrong reasons, or influences us to reject someone for the wrong reasons. So we like to think that our conscious thoughts instruct us on a day-to-day basis, and that's what influences the way that we behave and the decisions that we make. Unfortunately, through some of this detail, I hope you now realize that unconscious bias happens and causes us to act and behave in ways and make decisions in ways that are sometimes even incongruous or in the exact opposite direction of what we consciously believe. We know this. We see the examples of some of these things that we're taught. So as what Scott mentioned about 4-year-olds learning from society what to be scared of or what bias is, we learn this from stereotypes promoted in society, the social rule books that were taught by family, grandma telling you to mind your manners, look professional when you go into an interview, and even, unfortunately, the media we consume. And in fact, we've talked a lot about that in many different areas in society about how media impacts the way that our kids act. How about the way that media impacts what we do on a day-to-day basis in our jobs? So let's walk through where this shows up. We're going to start first with talent attraction. So this is obviously the Tinder logo. Talent attraction, sourcing, reviewing resumes, looking at profiles online reminds me a lot of my time on Tinder. Very brief time. I was not proud of some of the reasons why I rejected people. There's things that as you go to decide to swipe right or swipe left, a lot of thoughts go through your head. We hear this when people talk about, oh, that person's not my type. I want you to think of type as another code name for bias. So why do we allow ourselves to have these biases openly when it comes to our love life and then assume that it just disappears when we go into work every day? You can take my name as another example. When people first see my name, they see the last name, which is funny because it's the one thing that's not mine. It was given to me at birth. Plenty of other people have it, and it has plenty of more meanings than the one that automatically comes to mind for most people. But it has another meaning. When people read my name, they assume I'm white. I've always thought that was so interesting. I always wondered why. My favorite study that has ever been done is a really simple study. Researchers took resumes that were the exact same, and the only thing that they changed were the names at the top. They submitted them to the same job. They did this across a ton of different positions, occupations, industries. And what they found was that the resumes with traditional white names received 50% more callbacks than the same resumes with traditionally African American names. It's pretty crazy. So, could you have eliminated anybody with the name Lakeisha or Jamal? I think about that every day. As a recruiter, I go through resumes and probably take about 8 seconds per resume. I think one of the myths that's promoted in our industry is that we get really good at seeing what we need to see, and we can make decisions quickly. Another study that I was particularly affected by, because my company runs background checks, I'm sure many of you have as well, is a study on some of the suggestions that came out from the EEOC in the last couple years. In 2012, the EEOC grew concerned that companies who had that question on the application that said, have you ever been convicted of a felony? There's been other iterations as well that say, have you ever been convicted of a crime? Have you ever been arrested? The EEOC thought that employers were using that answer to that question to systematically eliminate candidates of a particular race that were more likely than others to possibly have a criminal background. So they suggested in 2012 that companies eliminate that off of their application. This became known as the ban the box movement. Now, the reason they did this was a couple of really interesting statistics. This one, I think, is probably the most staggering. It's that 1 in 3 African American men in the US can be expected to be incarcerated at some point in their lifetime. Now, an employer or a hiring manager that sees someone put something that's not relevant to the job or is something that's not an eliminating factor on the application and they eliminate them, this is who EEOC was most concerned about, is that it was creating a situation where at the top of the funnel, you're cutting candidates out of the picture before they can even compete for the job. So fast forward 5 years later, some researchers wanted to dig in on the impact of banning the box. There's been massive unintended consequences. After banning the box, researchers discovered that the rate of callbacks for white applicants versus black applicants rose 6-to-1. Now, we were talking about a 50% higher callbacks for white applicants in the last research study. This raises it by 450%. The thought process there that the researchers have suggested is what's happening behind the scenes is that employers, when they don't have the criminal record up front to judge off of, actually unconsciously or maybe consciously discriminate against candidates based on the color of their skin. More importantly, this had a massive impact in the regions where ban the box was most common. It meant a decrease in employment for African American men and Hispanic men. It gets even worse. So white ex-offenders were helped by the rule. They actually saw an increase in employment. And the thought process there is that, again, employers were subconsciously or not assuming that these applicants were less likely to have any criminal record or charges in their background. So now that we've talked about the talent attraction process and the sourcing and selection process, I want to kind of go into interviewing. So how many of you have had a picture in your mind about a candidate based on their online profile or a phone call with them, and when you meet them face to face, they're totally different than you expect? So I do this a lot. I try to guess people's heights. It's terrible. Obviously, height isn't a protected class, so obviously it's okay, but at the same time, why would anything I find out about someone online indicate what their height is? Maybe beside if they played on a basketball team in college. So with that, let's kind of dive into the impact that unconscious bias has on interviewing. Another research study done out of the University of Chicago wanted to look at the impact of accents on our ability to trust what someone's telling us. And you can see from the graph, what they found was that we see native speakers as more credible, those with a slight accent as less credible, and those with a heavy accent even less credible. What's really scary is they went further with this study and discovered that if someone in front of us is in peril, an oncoming train, and we have an opportunity to save them, we're less likely to save people with an accent different from our own. So, you think about this in kind of media and pop culture. Obviously, it seems to be something that also is promoted through stereotypes. But there's one exception to the rule, what those researchers found. Can anybody guess? British accents were viewed as more credible than any other accent. Again, you kind of think, okay, is this taught to us by society, by the movies we watch? We don't know. One other piece that they found in this study is something that really concerns me. It's something that makes it harder to teach this out of people. They found that this isn't just learned stereotypes, but that the region of our brain responsible for comprehension automatically ties a lack of comprehension to lack of credibility. So this is a really understudied area that needs more exploration, but to me, the more automatic we go with our reactions to people, the harder it is to change them, and the harder it is to fix their unconscious bias tied to that. So now that we've talked about accents, I'm going to go really obscure. So stay with me here. Handedness. How many of you think you make decisions based on being left-handed or right-handed? A few of you. So this research study was exceptionally clever. So this researcher decided he wanted to know what people's preferences were or how they judge others based on their handedness. So he gave a survey with these little blue beings called fribbles. Imaginary beings, obviously they don't exist anywhere. They're crafted to be innocuous for triggering unconscious bias. So they can't trigger based on race, gender, age, etc. So when the researcher gave this survey, he wanted to know which one, positive or negative attribute that was listed in the middle, did that person feel that fribble reflected. What did he find? Right-handers found the fribbles on the left to be smarter, happier, more honest, and more attractive. I don't know how you would judge these guys based on attractiveness. Left-handers showed the same preference, but not as strong as the right-handers. So we'll dig into why the left-handers were different than the right-handers, but first, let's get into some things about hiring managers and their biases. Mirror neurons, Brené Brown mentioned this morning. That is a functional area of your brain that allows you to mimic someone else. That same functional area allows you to have empathy. It's really the power behind telling someone to walk a mile in somebody else's shoes. When you step into a position of power, your mirror neuron activity decreases, which means your empathy decreases, specifically when interacting with those that have less power than you. So think of a hiring manager interacting with a candidate. More importantly, the severity of the decrease is correlated with whether your in-group is in the majority. So we talked a little bit about in-group earlier, when in regards to my sorority sister's question. This is particularly dangerous. So when you think about it, are your managers mostly male? Are they mostly white? Does that promote the same to be promoted into those positions? Does that mean that they have less empathy for people different from them? It's a pretty concerning point. We also see, now I know people are probably, oh my God, she put this on a slide. This has a really important point for you guys. Minority groups absorb the biases of the majority group, even if those biases are directly harmful or against their own group. Now, I put this up here because this is an example of a minority group that's trying to argue for something using a majority group's belief and behavior. You'll see this often when people point out contradictory statements, behaviors of minority advocacy groups, all those kinds of things. So, with all these thoughts occurring under our conscious radar, how in the world are we going to fix this? I really want to make sure you guys leave today with some tangible things you can do. Before we go there, I'm going to do some science first. So sorry, we're circling back to more neuroscience. In the last 10 years, neuroscience has done a ton of work to show that our brains are malleable and can grow way later in life than originally thought. All of us can learn and build new neural pathways and grow new neurons. What does that mean? You can teach an old dog new tricks. So keep that in mind for any of your hiring managers that give you any response like, I've been doing this for years, or I know what I'm doing, I'm the expert. Everybody should be in a constant state of learning and growing. So as individuals, either you and your hiring managers, maybe your more woke hiring managers, should start working on themselves first before we jump into the system discussion. So first, recognize and accept that you have bias. If you don't, it has a much stronger impact on your decision making. And to break it to your more intelligent, maybe your highly degreed hiring managers, the smarter you are, the more intelligent you are, the more your unconscious bias influences your decision making. This has been done in a ton of research, and I think that's a really important point to make, is that smart people aren't magically immune to unconscious bias. In fact, they're probably the ones that should pay more attention to it than everybody else. Second, become aware. In those most awkward moments, when you shake a candidate's hand, or when your manager shakes a candidate's hand, and that handshake is weak, and you're going, oh, really? I know how to give a professional handshake. I'm a hiring manager. Think through that. What if that person did 3 tours in Afghanistan and they have a hand tremor from multiple surgeries after an IED attacked their MRAP? Or maybe they've just moved here from a country where handshaking isn't the normal way to greet people that are strangers. The more you can become aware when it pops up, the stronger you're going to be at combating it. Last, put all of that into practice. Whether it's practicing mindfulness or meditation or anything you can do to pause your reaction when you're stimulated by someone's behavior in an interview or something they've said or something you notice on their resume. Question your own thoughts before you act on them. So now let's go through all the different ways that you can look at your own system and your own processes as a recruiter and a sourcer to at least make smaller impacts. Maybe you can't convince your hiring managers to give a shit about their biases, but at least, hey, as a recruiter, you're gonna make something happen. Look at your Boolean searches or any of your search terms. Again, question, why did you choose that particular term? Is it common in lower socioeconomic environments? Is it common for other countries? Because maybe your candidate studied abroad and came to the US. Did you put a city location that's highly affluent or highly white? You have to question these things. You have to make sure that from the top of your funnel, when you're going to source for candidates, that you're preventing yourself from automatically impacting your pipeline. Turn on or turn off, I'm sorry, my recruiters have this on, show profile photos. So we don't show profile photos when we search on LinkedIn. Obviously, seeing someone's picture triggers so many other things than just seeing their information on the LinkedIn profile. We think that it's a better way to be able to contact candidates without having any knowledge of maybe their race. Obviously, with name, you get an indication of their gender, but it helps you at least for some perspectives to keep that out of the picture. Look at what you can do to do blind recruiting. This may mean your ATS allows you to do anonymous searching, so the resumes don't have a name at the top. Some companies actually leverage other tools that are out there in their sourcing process that ensure that they're not searching based on those terms that I mentioned before. So explore blind recruitment, explore anonymizing your resumes. My company uses CoderPad. This allows us to do whiteboarding without having a face-to-face interaction with the candidate. It makes it much easier for the candidate themselves. They're not as stressed out, but it allows for our interviewer to not judge them for things that have nothing to do with their coding abilities. I also suggest if you're doing any testing, do it at the top of your process. That way you're gathering information on them as soon as possible in the most objective way. Obviously, that means your testing better be as objective as possible and doesn't have components to it that are influenced by your unconscious bias. Next, test your job ads for gender-coded language. We test all of our job ads before we post them. We want to know, does this lean language-wise to more female or male? Take the implicit bias test. Implicit bias, same thing as unconscious bias. This is a wonderful project out of Harvard. Make your managers take it. You can take it on anything. As you can see, they have tests on your bias against disability, Asian American, race, presidents, Arab, Muslim. It helps our hiring managers understand that these things happen subconsciously and they see a score associated with it. How strong is their unconscious bias? It really just helps open their minds a little bit, especially for those that are a little bit more statistically minded, want to see the evidence and want to take a test to prove to them that they have implicit bias. Now, you could do all of that, but you're probably not going to move the needle on your hiring manager's own implicit bias or unconscious bias. The only proven way to change your unconscious bias is through continuous exposure to people different from you. Get out into communities that you haven't traditionally recruited in, question what events you participate in. We even go so far as to ask our managers to go to events that have nothing to do with recruiting at all, but get them in the community. It's not a part of our corporate social responsibility program. It's literally training for our managers to start to interact with people outside of the bubble of the office. I also like to make a point here that we ask our kids to do this. How is it that when we get older, getting out of your comfort zone, exposing yourself to people different from you, isn't something that's a requirement? It's something that we congratulate people for going to countries, traveling, seeing the world, but we don't say it in our own communities. I find that kind of strange. How do you know it's making an impact? How do you know you've shifted the needle? My team looks at data. We are a federal contractor, so we have to submit data on our performance against 4 particular categories: race, gender, veteran status, and disability status. Whatever you can do, whether you're required or not, and obviously check with your legal counsel, figure out how you can track your pipeline metrics, your interview metrics, your hire metrics. Look at the coded language. There's a way for you to break down the language that certain managers are using to describe female candidates versus male candidates. Do it. Question whether or not your ATS or your tools can provide you these reporting dashboards. It's really important to start to see if they can give that to you, because if you don't, you're going to have a lot of work on your hands. Now, as recruiters, you can do all of that. You can shift the needle. I get that some of you might be thinking, well, my managers or my executives or my head of HR isn't really pushing this right now. I don't think that's needed in order for you to make an impact. We affect people's lives every day. We're not just in the business of filling recs. Every person we hire is pursuing a better life for them and their family. I think it's okay for you guys to start to care about this and start to promote to your hiring managers that you really care for them to also understand that this makes a difference. I think we can lead without having executives or D&I programs to tell us what to do. I think we all recognize the impact we can make as recruiters, and we can step up and do a better job of this. Thank you, guys. So I am more than happy to open up to Q&A. Obviously, I threw a ton of science at a lot of you, but if you have any questions from my perspective on anything, I'm more than happy to answer any of them. I put you all to sleep. Thank you, guys. I really appreciate it. Oh, sorry. There's a microphone. I should have pointed that out.
Thank you so much for sharing that information. I named my children Christian and Brooke for a reason, because I've known this research for a long time, being in the HR space for 20 plus years. And I guess I was curious as to what led you to this. I've had, people don't believe it, but I've had leaders that have made funny comments about names like Lakeisha, no, I'm not going to hire that person, and I'm a person of color in front of me. And so this is a real thing that you're talking about, where people were very comfortable around me being in HR, had worked with me for years, and admitted that they didn't select people based on names. So I want to reiterate that what you're sharing is, it's factual. So I'm curious as to how you came into this and how you decided to approach it, and I think it's great that you're doing it from a scientific approach, because that will help a lot of people be converted.
I think I came to it because I was noticing myself I'm totally honest. I know that I have biases. I know I've made those judgments, especially earlier in my career. This was really hard. So I started recruiting for intelligence agencies. I'm not going to name the intelligence agency, but I had a manager there that told me, please don't send me any candidates that have a name that sounds Middle Eastern. That was really hard at that time, especially because it was such a discussion point in the media. And his argument back to me was like, well, they're going to be treated unfairly. And people are going to be like, well, they're protecting our data systems from attack. And it was just crazy to me. I was at a staffing firm at the time. I had no power to change that. I think that's one of the reasons I also decided to go in-house with the company. Not to say that a staffing firm couldn't make that impact, but I think I kept seeing this pop up again and again, and I just wasn't okay with it. I couldn't sleep at night knowing that there was something I could do to make this better, if that just meant going to a company where I had the freedom to make this change.
Hi. What job posting tool do you use that eliminates the gender component?
So it's actually a website that you copy and paste your job post in.
Okay.
And you drop it in there, and it'll tell you what language is gender coded for male, what language is gender coded for female.
What website is that?
Let's see.
I don't think
I think there's a couple. I will make sure that we can, if you want to grab my card, I'll make sure to send it to you. I actually have the URL for you, but literally if you Google gender-coded job ad, it'll pop up, and a couple of tools will pop up. But it sounds like some people already have a couple other tools as well.
I heard Textio.
Textio. I've used Textio. This one I think is a home-built solution, we've preferred this one, but yeah.
Okay, one other question. You'd mentioned on LinkedIn you have the recruiters turn off the photo component. Any other advice that you have in using social media to look at candidates that come through to help leaders and recruiters not dive into the biases?
Oh, social media is such a fun...
Do's and don'ts.
Yeah. Depending on the state, there's certain laws that maybe aren't super supportive of people using social media profiles. My role with my recruiters and my hiring managers is, if it's relevant to the job for them to have a social media presence, yes, you can look at it, but they better go into it knowing, do not judge this person on the things that are related to them living their lives. I think there's a lot of talk about millennials having pictures of drinking and all these kinds of things online. I think to my parents, who were big partiers when they were growing up, I'm like, they would have never gotten a job if that rule was in existence. I think you just have to approach it like a human being. I always argue to my teams, like, you have to think through this. If this was you have to walk a mile in that person's shoes. Obviously, if there's things that are discriminatory on that person's profile and something that is inappropriate from an inclusion perspective, I absolutely wouldn't touch them. I think that's an okay reason to have an elimination of someone for their social media profile.
Thank you.
Oh.
She was first. Thank you for all the advice that you've given us as far as how to navigate hiring managers. That's always a challenge, being in talent. I am curious, you talked about the Ban the Box studies that have gone on and how that is impacting candidates receiving that call. Do you know if the EEOC is going to do anything to help us navigate that? Because besides just finding additional tools for us to blind our managers a little bit more?
I am in the same boat as you, wondering what's going to be next. California is currently moving towards, I work in California, and the majority of the hiring my team does is in California. California is trying to pass through the legislature right now an entire statewide ban the box movement, which is counterintuitive now that the research is coming out. I think we'll have to wait and see. I think companies have to question what they can put on there. But I think at the end of the day, when you get to the very end and you're running someone's background check, you have to be very sure that you know exactly why you're going to reject the person and make sure that it's not a discriminatory reason, and then check your metrics. Make sure that you're not doing it for some and not all. And until there's more guidance on that, I think it's a wait and see, and I think it's sign up for notifications from the federal government. I'm on a listserv where all those notifications go out to me so I can see every time they pass something new or make a new suggestion. So I think it's just pay attention and wait until some better guidance is provided.
Now, on that study with the Ban the Box law, was it done over several markets or just very particular markets? Because I'd be curious to see how it's different across the U.S. I mean, my team, we hire all over the U.S.
Yeah, so they did the study across the entire United States, and what they found is that discrimination was much more common in the Midwest, West, and Northeast because the pool of non-Black applicants was larger. Mm-hmm. So the opportunity to hire was more available to them. So they did study across the United States, but it is on a state-by-state basis right now as to whether or not companies are even banning it at all. But I think that's going to be a pretty contentious discussion going forward. But yeah, it's been viewed mostly in those regions as probably the biggest problem.
Can I just add as well that there's a lot of city ordinances that are doing ban the box. So for example, Philadelphia is a city that's done it, and so what's happening is rather than national, you've had some large urban cities that have taken that on as well. So that's probably where you'll see it more right now.
Yeah, I just know that it's going more and more across the U.S., and I think eventually we'll see it all. I mean, it's just going to be a standard hiring practice. So that's why I was just curious where we're seeing the spikes.
Yeah.
If there's been any research around that.
Okay, we have time for one last quick question.
Hi. I promise it'll be quick, but two really quick questions. I actually come from a company that really actually supports diversity and inclusion, and some of our issues are actually we get a lot of inbound applicants, and there's definitely a lot of openness to it, but for whatever reason, our pass-through rate to hire is like falling super flat. And so one of the things we're looking at is interview, like how to redesign our interview process to kind of eliminate the unconscious bias, and I was curious what your opinion is on that, and have you seen anything successful in that arena? And the second question I have is, how do you solve for someone not feeling like they're the diverse candidate too in the process? Because we have that too, where we have goals, and then we have people being like, oh, am I the diverse candidate? Are you hiring me just because I'm diverse?
Yeah. So I'll answer your second question first. That's really tough. So I have a manager who's amazing. She's a female leader. She's definitely in an executive position where you would say she's amongst mostly men. She goes, Ginny, I just hire the best person for the job and I don't worry about the rest of that. Well, you have to worry about the rest of it, because if your unconscious bias is influencing your decision process all the way through, the best person for the job might not actually be the best person for the right reasons. If someone has a concern about being hired because they're a diversity candidate, I think these are conversations that have to happen. You can't exactly answer what's personal to them about how they feel about it, or the individual that feels like you're hiring someone else because they're a diversity candidate, or someone on your team. I think it's to what Brene Brown said this morning is, you have to have those hard conversations with your group. If your group is mostly white and your one diversity employee feels like they're in the out group, you have to have those conversations. You have to start to talk about this stuff, because people will shut down if you just make it a rule and just say, tough, this is what we're doing. It has to be a continuous discussion.